Everyone's curious and the anticipation has been great, but we've entered the home stretch and the reviews for The Last of Us Part 2 are out now. In fact, if you want to see our full review, you can find the link in the description below. However, this video won't just be a video version of our review. This is to address the burning question in a lot of people's minds. Is this game worth playing? We're not going to skirt around it. We're well aware that there were massive leaks that came about a while back, which have sort of marred people's thoughts on the game. Now, having finished The Last of Us Part 2 and having experienced the game fully, we wanted to make this video to address the elephant in the room. We present to you our case as to why The Last of Us Part 2 is worth playing despite the leaks. Now take note. In this video, we will be avoiding story-specific and plot-related spoilers, and will keep to general aspects of the game and the overall experience we took from it. With that said, my name is Rob.
And I'm Nico.
Let's begin. Delivery is more than half the battle. There are a number of players that have seen or heard of the leaks that came out for The Last of Us Part 2. While I won't mention any specifics about it, what I can definitely tell you is that after finishing the game, I can say that a huge part of the whole experience could not be seen in the leaks. And that is in the delivery / the execution aspect of the game. The Last of Us Part 2 definitely takes some huge risks, with some of its decisions for its story potentially being viewed as controversial in the eyes of some fans. But however the narrative swings during its gameplay, the game masterfully ties everything together and presents them as a cohesive story. There aren't any story developments that were made simply for the sake of shock factor, and just for the sake of making them. Each story element of The Last of Us Part 2 has intent, purpose, and proper flow. When you think about it, controversial choices are kind of par for the course when you look back to The Last of Us Part 1. If you just read the ending on paper, it probably would have sounded like a huge waste of time, or would have seemed like a huge why moment. But it was in how it was done that turned the ending of Part 1 into one of the most memorable moments in gaming. So do keep an open mind and let Part 2 take you for a ride. Ellie, take the wheel.
Smart AI makes for incredible gameplay. The Last of Us Part 2's core gameplay loop and base combat system should be familiar to anyone who has played the first Last of Us. Much like in the first game, players fight through groups of humans or infected, which they can either sneak past or face off against. After encounters, players will then be able to loot for ammo, as well as materials which can be used to craft more weapons or items that can aid in combat. What elevates The Last of Us Part 2's combat over its predecessor though, is the improved enemy AI. In this game, human enemies react way more realistically compared to the first. This adds a strong undercurrent of tension to every enemy encounter. In Part 1, enemies only had two states. Either they're unaware of your presence, or they know exactly where you are. This can make the first game's combat a bit two-dimensional. Enemies now have a middle state, which happens when they spot a silent kill or if they run into an enemy you just killed. In this middle state, enemies will have an idea of where you are, but they don't know exactly where, so they'll try and look for you, oftentimes in groups. While you might think that you can get away with hiding until they stop searching for you, enemies are smart enough to properly peek corners and even check underneath cars or other hiding spots. If enemies do spot you, you can try and fight them. Be warned though, they can flank and catch you by surprise, or draw you out with Molotov cocktails. So you better have a melee weapon and enough ammo at hand when you choose to face foes head on. If not, you can try and make a run for it and hide to re-enter stealth. Once they lose track of you though, you still can't relax, as unlike in other stealth games where enemies conveniently forget that there was an intruder just now, foes in this game will still be on alert and seek you out. While human enemies are smarter now, that doesn't mean the infected are pushovers in this game. Sure, they may be more predictable, but they are just as or even deadlier than human foes. Aside from the usual runners and clickers, Part 2 introduces new infected types such as the Shambler, Plus, the stalkers from the first game are back, but this time, they're deadlier than ever. Much as I'd like to say more about the infected, I'm gonna stop right there to preserve your experience. One thing I can say though, is that in The Last of Us Part 2, these infected are even scarier than in the first. Aside from better AI, there are also new mechanics, such as the ability to crawl or squeeze through cracks in walls, as well as dodge melee attacks. These may not seem like much, but they add so much depth to enemy encounters. Adding the fact that levels are much bigger in Part 2 makes for an even better and more tense experience.
Enhanced gaming experience. More than just combat, Naughty Dog really did what they could to raise the bar with this sequel in a lot of ways. First off, the visuals are stunning. There's noticeably a lot more detail in the world. During the day, your surroundings are breathtaking, and there will be times that you won't be able to help yourself, but to just take a moment to take the sights in. During the night, darkness is presented in such an oppressive way that really enhances the tension. In terms of visuals though, one of the things that really impressed me was how it became increasingly more difficult to distinguish which scenes were in-game graphics and which ones were cinematics. I only found out due to my recordings. Basically, while I was capturing game footage, I wanted to set my clips at the start of a cinematic, so what I would do was I'd press the options button to select the replay cinematic option, only to discover at times that I wasn't even in a cinematic. I was floored by the fact that it was so difficult to tell, and to see The Last of Us get to this level of quality is just amazing to witness. Of course, it doesn't just stop at visuals. Sound design and voice acting are really up there too. One thing that was really noteworthy for me was how enemies have names. When you're spotted killing someone, or if the enemies find a body, they tend to call out to their fallen ally by name and yell something like, "Oh my god, Jill's dead." It's a small touch, but it definitely adds weight to your actions, knowing that they weren't just nameless NPCs. Finally, the game also put in a lot of systems to make the game as inclusive as possible via the new accessibility options. Here you can choose several settings that can help you out with any difficulties you may be encountering. There are modes for people with color blindness, options that color code subtitles to who's talking, indicators for where the talking person is located, some settings that help with motor difficulties, and many more. There are quite a lot of improvements that were placed to make sure that people can enjoy this game even more so than the first one.
A strong artistic theme and message. The first Last of Us game is praised as one of the best stories in video games, and I'd have to agree. So how does Part 2 fare? Well, it's way more ambitious, and dare I say, it's much stronger than the original, especially when it comes to themes. While the first game had a strong central idea, Part 2 outdoes it by having multiple themes and messages. Part 2 explores themes such as revenge, tribalism, and obsession. So yes, The Last of Us Part 2 is a heavy game, even more so than the first, I would say. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some positive moments, it's just that the game goes to much darker places. What makes the game even better is that these themes aren't just presented through dialogue or through cutscenes. Naughty Dog takes full advantage of gaming as a medium to let you feel the weight of the themes in relation to both the game's world and our own. Similar to, say, God of War, which explores fatherhood, Death Stranding, which tackles the importance of connections, or even FF7 Remake with its environmental themes. The Last of Us Part 2 has ideas and messages that are powerful and relevant not only in relation to the human condition, but also in relation to current events. It's tough to fully explain how they're relevant without going into spoiler territory. So let me just say this. Even over a week after playing The Last of Us Part 2, I still couldn't get it out of my mind. With how much Naughty Dog focused on the themes, you might think that the story itself suffered because of this. Don't worry. The Last of Us Part 2 story is still expertly told. Not only is the story riveting, it's also filled with complex characters, with each of them having even more complex relationships. And finally, the game's story does its wonderfully complex characters justice. And that's it! The Last of Us Part 2 comes out on June 19, 2020 for the PS4, and we highly recommend that you give it a try. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Keep on gaming.